Alright, this is the 10th and final video in my World Building for Fantasy series. You can find the rest in a playlist up in the cards. As always, the purpose of this video series is to provide a jumping off point for beginner fantasy world builders and to give you ideas on how different world building elements can affect your stories. This is geared towards writers, especially novelists like myself. Alright, these are some of my favorite general world building tips that I didn't really get to cover in any of the other videos, mostly because they kind of encompass all aspects. First is consider your story first. Your world building is going to depend a lot on the kind of story and characters you want to write, and along with that, the audience you're writing for. This is assuming, of course, that you're looking to publish what you're writing at some point in the future. So if you're looking to write a more classic high fantasy type of story, you're probably going to make more of a classic high fantasy kind of world. Usually set in a medieval time period, and you're going to have fantasy races such as elves and dwarves and ogres and so on. Your world building should reflect the kind of story you're telling depending on what your audience is expecting. Not saying you can't write about elves in an urban fantasy setting, of course you can. That is its own subgenre. And with that subgenre come certain reader expectations. And you should keep those certain reader expectations in mind when you're world building. It's a good idea to research books that are similar to the one you're looking to write. Read them not only as a reader, but also as a writer, meaning you're probably stopping frequently to assess different areas of the story and the world building and the structure to figure out what elements you can make unique to yourself and what elements the readers are expecting. You want to meet and exceed reader expectations, not tease them with things that they like and then hit them over the head with stuff from a different genre. Next is, not every idea is good. Sorry. Sometimes you'll hear people say that the first couple of ideas you come up with aren't going to be very good ones, and I kind of believe that. It can take a lot of thinking and planning and combining of different ideas to get something that feels unique to you and doesn't just feel like a copy-paste thesaurus. That doesn't mean you should throw away everything you think of first, it just means to keep trying and see if that is really the best idea to fit with these other things that you've already come up with. When you're considering adding a new element to your world or just building up your world building, think about how the elements fit with the things adjacent to it. Does it make sense for the rest of your world? Does it create the possibility for plot holes? And can you add any more limitations to avoid these things? Next is use reasoning. Why? Keep asking yourself that. You should have an answer most of the time, but of course sometimes the answer can be, because it's cool? Trying to keep your fantasy world believable is an oxymoron. I know. I don't mean it should be believable in the sense that it should be not fantastical. I mean the reader should be able to believe what you're telling them without being taken out of the story. If your world building doesn't feel cohesive, or it seems to contradict itself, or it feels like you're just making up weird stuff for the sake of making up weird stuff, this can be really distracting to readers and can pull them out of the story. No matter how good the story is, if the world building is confusing or distracting, the readers aren't going to have a great time reading. Of course, this is always going to be a gray area where you're just going to have to use your best judgment, but most of world building and a lot of writing is a gray area where you have to use your best judgment. So when you're making up weird stuff, ask why. What is its purpose to the story and world that you've created? How does this element connect to the other elements you've created? And what purpose does it serve? Next is balancing story and world building. It's sometimes difficult to balance world building and story when it comes to actually writing the book. Too much story and the world building feels underdeveloped, and too much world building and the story feels slow. I'm not sure what % of writers have which problem, but I bet most, if not all, have one or the other. Personally, I have the first one. So the main, most important, most unique, most interesting elements of your world building should be mentioned throughout the book, right? The things that make your world unique are what readers are really interested in. So use them throughout the story to continually give that feeling that your world creates. You have to figure out how to combine the story you're looking to tell with the world building itself to make them feel like one cohesive piece. It can be really difficult when you're just making the world building to tell if your world building is over-engineered, but once you figure out most of the story and you kind of start working on these things together, it should be easier to start figuring out that balance. Sometimes you just have to go through multiple drafts to figure out where your balance actually is, and that can mean deleting elements. But I think the more books you write and the more you play with different world building elements and just kind of experience those different issues, the easier it becomes to not only identify the problem, but identify it early and get rid of it. Next is make different things different. So just like crutch words, I think I have crutch details too. I often find myself making up different versions of the same detail, which just kind of feels like I'm being lazy in the creativity department, which is just a really dumb thing for a writer to do. So, for example, if you're writing multiple different fantasy races, don't make the main identifying element the same thing for all of them, like clothing. Have different details that are important to different people. The people of one group maybe have unique clothing and academics, and the other has food and a special holiday. If you use the same element to identify multiple different things, it can not only be boring, but also confusing. Next is conflicting information is a problem. It will come back to haunt you. No follow-up questions, please. Sometimes less is more. Going really detailed on a select few elements of world building is, in my opinion, better than having less detail on a larger amount of elements. Say, for example, you're building a fantasy race of elves and you're making up something for their cuisine. You could come up with 5 different dishes that sound vaguely elvish in nature and call that good. Or you could make up one signature dish. And maybe the main flavors in this dish is a certain spice. And the spice is native to their home region and is only available in the fall, which is also when they have their main harvest festival. So then maybe one of the elf characters really loves this dish and spice because it reminds them of their childhood and back home, enjoying the festival, spending time with family and friends, and that kind of stuff. And then you could have another elf character, they could even be from the same town, but maybe they had a completely different experience growing up, and so the spice that reminds them of home is something they don't like at all. You can see how elaborating on one element can make the world building feel more full and vibrant, and give your elements deeper meaning to your story and your characters. You're kind of always trying to build this weave of details and story and characters together like some kind of blanket or tapestry. Figuring out how to pull all your details, your elements of your characters and your story elements and your world building together into one cohesive thing that feels like it all comes from the same place is a lot of work, but once you start learning how to weave different details together and like entwine them like a rope, it starts to make your stories feel a lot more whole and just vibrant, like they could come from a real place or something. Alright, I will have some of my other favorite world building resources linked down below in the description. I guess I'm done with world building videos, so now what do I do? Alright, if you'd like to dive into the world of Alexia, you can check out Age of the Gods, which is a free short story I'll have linked down below. Alright, that's all I got for you, so thanks for watching. Bye!